Would you love to be sitting in front of an inclusion guru today where you can ask any question? Well, guess what? That's what we're going to be doing. I am so excited because our special guest today is an author. These are just a few of the books that she's written, and I always have to figure out how to show them to you. She's also an author of a variety of inclusion articles. She just recently started doing a podcast about inclusion. And the one thing that you probably don't know is she is also an artist, and I have one of her paintings. How about that? So not only does she know a lot about inclusion and how to make caring, creative communities in our schools, but she has that artistic flair that I think just brings this whole other dimension to her. And so I want to introduce you to Julie Causton. Good morning, Julie.
Hi, Charmaine. How are you?
Good. I'm so glad you're a returning guest.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be back. And I think you're the only person in the world that says that I'm an artist, which I appreciate. So thank you.
Well, I thought, this would be a great time. It's summer. People have pretty much ended the school year, I think, around the country. And this is a great time where we just have a conversation about inclusion. Because I know on my Facebook page and talking with parents as an advocate, there's always a lot of questions that people have. So this is a time where you can come on as our viewers, if you're watching us live or in the replay, and type in your comments, and we can show them up here like Carrie's. And she says she can't wait. So, Carrie, you can be our first questioner if you would like, because this is just going to be a time where we can chat about things. So while we're waiting for people to join us, Julie, I would love for you to be able to talk about your new podcast.
Okay.
I've listened to your episodes and I love them. I know you're going to be broadcasting or recording a new one soon. So let us know about what made you decide to do a podcast.
Oh, thanks. So I am thrilled about this podcast. I've created a podcast, and it's just a series of conversations where I'm answering questions from folks who write into me regularly around the country around inclusion. So what questions do people have about inclusion? And I center each podcast around one or two questions from folks. Sometimes it's school administrators that are writing in. Sometimes it's teachers. Sometimes it's parents. Sometimes it's students. And I'm addressing these questions. But what I love about it is I select questions that I think are pretty common, and I respond to them in ways that I think are sort of replicable. So my answer is something that I think, whether you're a teacher in South Dakota or a teacher in Texas or a teacher in California or a teacher in New York, you can do what I'm suggesting, I think, easily to create more inclusive schools and classrooms. And the last couple have actually centered around administrators. I happen to have a lot of administrators that work with me and ask me a lot of questions about inclusion. And so I've kind of started the podcast with a pretty wide lens of what is inclusion. So the first one's kind of an introduction. The second one is kind of a what is inclusion piece. And the way that I did that, I think, is useful because sometimes parents are asking, like, how do I describe inclusion to my school? How do I convince people to include my child? And then there are educators who are saying, what does it even look like? Or I get it, I understand it, but man, with this particular student, I'm struggling. So anyway, that's what the second one is. The third one is from an administrator, and I love the third episode. It's called The Necessary Conditions. And it's a school superintendent who asked me sort of, how do I create the necessary conditions for inclusion? And that I break it down into, I think, 7 big ideas. And then I'm about to create a podcast. When I say create, it's a pretty weird process that I have, but I actually create the podcast as I'm doing it. So my next podcast is a question that's come up from a teacher who wants to know, how do they use their summer best to prepare for the school year? And they're about to take on an inclusive classroom. And so I've got a lot to say about that particular topic. So that's what the next one's going to be. And that one should be out. That's episode 4, and that will be out next week.
And one of the things that I noticed, Julie, was that you are doing just 15-minute, slices for your podcast. And sometimes you think 15 minutes, what can you talk about in 15 minutes? But I love how you condense the topic. You tell a story so it's engaging at the beginning, and then you get into really specifics. It's not theory. It's like, this is what you can actually, implement. So why did you pick a 15-minute kind of time slot for your podcast?
Oh my gosh. Thank you for asking that question, Charmaine. I wish my children were here because I am obsessed with the 15-minute increment. So what I mean by that is I schedule every single day and every single, even Saturdays and Sundays, I schedule them in 15-minute increments. And my scheduling process is super fascinating. But essentially, I put all of the things I could possibly do on a weekly list. And then each day I go through and prioritize. And then I do everything in 15-minute increments. So that being said, I know that the brain works really well in 15-minute increments. I'm somebody with the label of ADHD. And so having this structure in my life allows me to be incredibly efficient with everything I do. So I have designed these podcasts, of course, in around 15-minute increments. And it's because I know a lot about adult learning. And we can stay focused and engaged for about 15 minutes before we start to go somewhere else. And I'm trying to be inclusive in the way that I've designed this podcast so that people feel like they can stay with me for 15 minutes. And then, of course, you can pause and all the kinds of things you can do for a podcast if you need more support than that. And the other reason is I want to be really efficient for you. So many educators are saying they are downloading my podcast and then they're using them on the way to school and on the way home from school. And I think that's pretty cool. Someone called it their daily vitamin, which I thought was really cool. They said, I take a daily vitamin, but now in addition to my daily vitamin, I listen to your podcast. And she's like, I think you should rename your podcast the Inclusion Vitamin or something. It's very sweet. So I love that feedback. And so I've gotten a lot of feedback around the 15-minute increment. And I think I can be pretty efficient for people. So that's my goal.
So, yeah, that sounds like, and I think, we can use that in the classroom also, as far as when we're looking at structuring lessons for kids. And that could be, even maybe an accommodation in the IEP, as far as, I think when we have accommodations written in the IEP, then it helps the teachers use that strategy for everybody in the class.
Right. So my thinking about time is really, I talk about it with teachers a lot. Every single time I'm observing in a classroom, which is, I'm in classrooms every single week, what I talk about is effective and efficient use of time and differentiating your thinking around the use of time. So it's probably too complex to talk about here, but what I do is talk about the fact that some learners are going to be done with that assignment like that, and other learners are going to want twice the amount of time. And so because we don't have time turners in our lives, I'll give you a quick example. I'll say must do, can do. So instead of saying you have to do all 20 problems, you must do 10. And if you want to do 20, you may. And do you see what that does for learners? If you want to luxuriate in those 10 problems and really have a deep understanding, great. If you want to bang through those problems, that's how I work. I love to work fast. So if you want to bang through all 20 problems, great. And so I even think about the time segments we give for kids and how to think about them in pretty different ways than I think most people do. And it makes the classroom, more inclusive. in lots of ways. So.
Oh, I think so. And when you look at time, I know a question that comes up a lot for teachers is, how do general ed and special ed teachers find the time to collaborate, which is so important? And so do you have any hints or tips about that?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to show this book cover because I don't know if you've seen it or not. Let me see. Where's the camera? So
yes, I have that book.
Okay. So my co-author, Paula Kluth, and if you don't know her, you need to. Paula Kluth and I wrote this book, The 30 Days to the Co-Taught Classroom. And you're asking a question about how do teachers design that time to co-plan? I want to back up and say two things. All inclusive practices that are really good take some planning. And the magic of inclusive practice happens in that planning time. And so we know that general and special education teachers need to be together to plan. And then the other piece I wanted to say is there's never enough of it. Like there is simply never enough co-planning time. I've yet to be in a school district where they say, oh man, we've got so much planning time. It's not a problem, right? So the reason I bring the book up is one of the things that Paula and I have found is that in very short time increments, we can teach teachers to be very effective in their planning. So for example, we're doing a lot of what I call 5-minute problem solving sessions where teachers are sitting together. They literally have I have my iPhone right here. They literally have their phone. They have set their timer and they do these 5-minute problem solving sessions. So think about it. In 15 minutes, you can do 3 problem solving sessions. The other thing we're doing is the 15-minute planning session where teachers are sitting together for 15 minutes and planning a lesson. Now, what's fun about it is we've got templates and things for you to take and use. So basically we say, consider these things. If you consider these things in your lesson design, you're going to be really set. So for example, are you considering what you're both doing during the lesson? If we don't plan that, too often what happens is one teacher teaches and the other teacher sort of walks around and supports, as one teach, one support, or, one teach, one kneel and whisper, like that's kind of what ends up happening. And so we make sure that people have thought through the fact that if one person's teaching, the other person must be making it multisensory in some way. So are they making it visual? Are they making it auditory? Are they making it, are they dancing out the particular topic? Are they drawing it out? What are they doing to make the learning more sticky for all kids? And we know, of course, that helps our learners who might struggle to learn in traditional ways. But of course, it makes it accessible to everybody.
Yeah, I just love that. And it's like that makes such a huge difference and I think the other thing I was thinking of when you were talking about that, I don't know if you've heard of the Solution Circle. I think it was somebody from Canada that developed it. And they take it as a 20 or 30 minute block of time. And there's specific questions that you go through. And so, yeah, I think having a structure to your planning time versus we're going to chat over lunchtime and not really have it structured would make a great difference,
Right. And the structures that we put in place in this book are phenomenal. In fact, I'd say that's one of the biggest comments that we've gotten is that those educators who take this book and put it into practice talk about the fact that when they stay on those agendas, they are so efficient with their planning, and what that allows them to be is just more successful. I want to back up to, you asked the question, how do teachers, find the time and to do this work? And I basically said there isn't enough and they have to be really efficient. The other work that I do is I explain to administrators just how critical this is. So I help administrators design schools so that when teachers are co-teaching, they are having time to co-plan in large enough segments to move the needle for kids, right? So that's a piece that I talk a lot to administrators about. And then for families, if you're listening, and I'm certain there are lots of families listening, in the IEP itself, you can get consult time written in. And maybe, Charmaine, you want to talk more about that because you do a lot more of the IEP work, if you have any tips that way. But essentially getting that consult time, which is that face-to-face time for educators to work together, is a very valuable service. I think sometimes more valuable than that face-to-face service. So a lot of times we're pushing for minutes of that special ed teacher to be sitting next to my kid and teaching them something. Well, when we structure minutes that way, what happens is you're often getting support for your child that is not very inclusive and can be quite stigmatizing. So even in an inclusive setting, you've got an adult sitting next to your kid teaching them something. And my preference is take those same number of minutes and have the general ed teacher and special ed teacher plan together so that when you're learning about the, World War II, the goals of your child's IEP are embedded into the lesson and in a really natural way, instead of that side-by-side support, which we know can be we know that it's not as effective.
Right. Oh, I love that. I love it. I love it. So we've got a question from Janet here, and she says, "Hi, Julie. I have a question about teaching students with intellectual disabilities in the general ed classroom. Here's my question. Students with intellectual disabilities require specially designed instruction to really learn material to their potential. The material that they are learning needs to be modified as well. I see a lot of modified work, but not modified content or instruction, and that concerns me. In addition, most teachers are not aware of how to teach students with significant disabilities. How do you suggest this instruction?"
Thank you, Janet, for being brave and asking the first question. I love it. I'm just going to kind of break it down. Oh, Charmaine, can you put the question back up so I can keep it as...
Okay.
Sure. Okay, so students with intellectual disabilities require specially designed instruction, is what you started with, to really learn the material. I agree. And then you said, I see a lot of modified work, but not modified content or instruction. And I also agree. I see a lot of times where the work itself is modified in terms of like number of problems or percentage of the work that has to be completed, but not necessarily the content itself. How do we suggest that we manage that? And then how do I... that many teachers aren't aware of how to teach kids with significant disabilities. So I'm going to go backwards, Janet, because that's how my brain works. I'm going to start with, how do I suggest that we think about students with more significant disabilities? I want to start with this weird thing that I've noticed, and I'm going to call it fear for just sort of a lack of a better phrase. So many times I am working with an awesome educator and they say, I don't know how to do this. I've never worked with a kid like this. I've never had a student who blah, blah, blah. And it's, the only word I could say is fear, and that might not be the right word, but it feels like fear to me. It's like, and I try to think about what's underneath that fear. And I think what might be underneath that fear is fear of not being effective, or fear of not doing the best job that they can. And so I think it's a pretty complex way to support a teacher who's doing this the first time. But I like to support first the emotion of it all, which is we're going to give lots of different things a shot. It's going to be okay to try new things and experiment. It's going to be okay to not be perfect at the very start. And the other piece of it is not a new thing. Teaching is teaching is teaching is teaching. So we're not suddenly asking you to do rocket science when you are a teacher. Instead, it's taking all those skills that teachers already have and it's expanding them out. And so, for example, the number one thing you need to know as an educator is kids must love you and respect you, and you must love and respect kids. So like we start there, and these teachers are often so good at making connections with kids. And literally that's where I start. You know how to make connections. Let's start with a connection. Then we learn about the kid themselves. What are their gifts, strengths, talents? Too often they get stuck on what can't this person do? So this person can't read, so how am I supposed to do Shakespeare? This person can't blah, 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 so how am I supposed to? And I understand that's a real fear because it feels like this is a necessary piece to this. So instead I say, okay, cool, this is what they can't do. what can they do? And I make a long list. And it can be something as simple as they can connect to peers. And I say, oh, I love it. So let's start with that. They can connect to peers. Could we partner read this Romeo and Juliet novel? Could we, right? And I start with all the ways that you can utilize partners and peers to support this student's learning. Or maybe they say, oh, this kid loves the computer. In fact, they're obsessed with the computer. And I say, awesome. How do we use that computer to move into instruction? And so, of course, we start with the connection, and then we move into their strengths, and then we move into the curriculum and connections. Now, this answers the first part of your piece, which is a lot of people say that, specialized instruction is necessary. And I like to use what I call learning targets. So what I mean is the whole class is learning this, and this particular student might be learning these 3 parts. And like I said before, when I gave that other example, maybe there are 5 things that everyone's learning, and you want everyone to learn these 3, and you'd love it if everyone learned these 5, right? And so you start to be a little bit flexible about what it is that that particular student can learn. When we move into this concept of alternative curriculum, and Charmaine, jump in if you disagree, right? But when we move into this concept of alternative curriculum, we're headed down a different path. And that is a tricky decision. And the path that I'm talking about is really kind of not standards-based. And I try to figure out, even for students with intellectual disabilities, how do we start with a standards-based content curriculum and get as close as we can to the standards with the right supports? Charmaine, do you have a thought on that? I don't want to only answer.
I totally agree. Because I think we want to look at what the standards are, what everybody in that general ed classroom is going to be learning, and then what are some of those top concepts that we want to identify. And I really encourage, I don't know why I'm getting that feedback. Let me put in my headphones. Do you hear the feedback, Julie?
I don't hear it, but I don't know if other do.
But what I encourage parents to do is to sit down with the special ed teacher and the general ed teacher when there's going to be a new unit of study and say, what are the big concepts, the big ideas that we want, my child, this student to learn? And so having the parent input about, we've traveled to the Four Corners in Colorado. And so when you study Mesa Verde, my son can bring in these photos that we took and he can show these to the kids. And, so I think there's that element of what the parent knows about the child and if they have background knowledge. And so I really encourage the 3 people to sit down and talk when they identify what concepts they want, the child to learn.
Yeah, that's a helpful piece too, is make sure that the right people are at the table, and even sometimes bringing the student in. So it depends on the student's age.
Right.
But what I find is when we make decisions for kids, we're often too narrow in our thinking about what a student can achieve. And when I involve kids in the decisions, they're often like, no, I can do this and that and more. And so that helps me think about curriculum and content design for kids with intellectual disabilities for sure, but it also allows me to think about curriculum and content design for everybody. So Janet, back to that question, I actually think having a student with an intellectual disability makes teachers much better at their job. And what I mean by that is all of a sudden we realize that, whoa, we're going to have to think carefully about what can this kid accomplish during this amount of time. And that makes us think, well, what can every kid accomplish during this amount of time? Which is why I don't know, I'll turn you to 2 places if you don't know already. In the 30 days, we've got a whole section on differentiation. And also in the Green Book, the Educator's Handbook, we've got a whole section on how to use learning menus so that kids can have choice in what they produce. But it's not just for the student with an intellectual disability, it's for everybody in the class.
Yeah, and I think when you look at differentiation, when you look at universal design for learning, and that principle of how are we going to help kids stay engaged and motivated, it's by tapping into their strengths and their interests. And that makes a huge difference for kids being happy and successful in the classroom, you know. We have a question from Amanda. So let me see if I can pull that up here. I saw it. Here we go. So Amanda is in Virginia, and she says, how can we as parents make suggestions for these classroom teaching planning strategies?
Hi, Amanda. Thanks for writing in. I think there are a lot of ways. I'm going to give you a variety of answers to this question. The reason I'm going to give you a variety of answers is because it really depends upon your relationship with your team. So I'm going to start with the fact that some teams, they will take ideas and try them and go with it, right? And you have a very fluid and supportive relationship. That's the goal. So let me start there. The goal is, how do I get close to having this very fluid, interactive relationship with my team where I can suggest things? Now, most people aren't there. Most people are somewhere else, from kind of where the educators really run the show and the parents sort of show up and at those key times, like an IEP meeting. So during the IEP meeting, if that's your way of being able to influence, I think it's a good idea to show up with some ideas. And I'm sure Charmaine has shared these ideas before with her audience, but I like to start with a vision. So really kind of broadening out, what's the vision for your child? And when the educators say, wait, how, right? Like, what would that look like? It's useful then to have a lot of resources. The other thing, you can put training right in the IEP. So many of the school districts that I personally work with, I work with them because parents have said, we want training on how to create inclusive practices in our schools. And they literally give the administrators my name, or Charmaine's name, or Christy Casa's name, or Paula Kluth's name, or Alice Uvari-Solner's name, or Patrick Schwartz's name, or Cheryl Jorgensen's name, like any one of those people. And they come in and provide the training right there in the school district. I think it's very difficult for families to effectively share strategies. But getting an expert in that does this work and does the training is a really useful thing. It's usually pretty useful for your child, but the beauty is it's also useful for everybody in that district or that school, whatever works. Some of these people, these experts in inclusion, do small team-based training. So they come in and just work with your child's team. And some of them, like I do all of it, I guess, but I mostly do whole district training. So I'm training the entire district about how to create more inclusive schools and classrooms. So I've kind of shared that one of it is just having a really lovely, fluid relationship where you can suggest ideas. Another is at the IEP suggest training. Another is articles that you can share. So Charmaine, do you want to hold up that one that Christy Casa and I wrote that you've got right there? Maybe you've already read it, but I think yep. So achieving inclusion, what every parent should know when advocating for their child. If you Google that, Christy Casa and I wrote this article, and it gives a lot of strategies for how to get this across to your teachers and kind of what to get across to your teaching teams. So that might be a good thing to Google and print. It's free to take and use. My other idea is that lots of the parents that I work with have book studies with teachers. And so they will really like this one, the Educator's Handbook, the green one. They will give that to their team and say, let's go through that step by step and talk about the pieces in there. So in that book, I'm just going to turn to the table of contents so you understand what's in it if you don't have it already. Basically what we do, this one's written by Chelsea Tracy Bronson and I. Maybe I can't ever find my acknowledgments are long. There it is. Anyway, we basically explain and break down all the big pieces of, here it is, so chapter 1 is like what the general and special educator, how they work together. What is inclusive education? There's a whole section on presuming competence, so rethinking students. I love chapter 4. Chapter 5 is how do you collaborate with other people, right? So like Charmaine asked, how do you get time to do that? Then we've got providing academic supports. So chapter 6 is all the ways to provide academic supports. Chapter 7 is on behavioral support. So I don't know your child, but if they need behavioral supports, that's the place. Social supports, and then supporting and supervising paraprofessionals. And then the last chapter is caring for yourself to do this work. So it's for educators to really think about how they need to fill their own tanks in order to be effective, which is true for all parents too.
Oh, exactly. And I wanted to let people know that we're going to have a book giveaway because I love giving new books out to people. So if you are interested in winning one of Julie's books, type #inclusion in the comments and you'll have a book entry into the contest. And then I'll also explain to you how you can get more chances. So I've chosen just 3 of Julie's books, The Educator's Handbook, The Principal's Handbook, and The Paraeducator's Handbook. So if you're interested, go ahead and type #inclusion in the comments. And I know we have also, let's see here, we have Dinah from Washington, and she said that she's in the process of picking up her little girl from kindergarten, her last day of school. So she's blasting this for all to hear. And I wanted to, say, if you are finding this valuable, go ahead and share. You can just click on your share button right now, share it in your own Facebook page, in any groups that you're with. Because the more people that hear the message and the tips and strategies that Julie's giving us, the greater impact we'll have on change. And I just wanted to also kind of piggyback on some of the things that Julie was saying about training. And it is true. So many parents and even staff don't realize that you can write training into the IEP because it's services for your child, but also for those who work with your child. And I like to be really specific because if you just write in, training about inclusive ed, sometimes they'll have a staff meeting and they'll pass out an article or, watch a short video and say, well, we did our training on inclusive ed. So I always suggest parents be real specific about who's going to do the training, how long it's going to occur for, what ongoing follow-up is going to be there, what the coaching part of the training is going to look like, because we need people like Julie who can actually come in and not only give you the information, but then be in the classroom and be modeling that and coaching the teachers as they're doing it. So that is what makes the implementation successful, not just having one professional development day. So I really appreciate people like Julie that can actually go in classrooms and help teachers look at how they're teaching in a new way.
Mm-hmm. I just want to add what Charmaine said to the question about the student with an intellectual disability. And you said, how do I help teachers sort of understand how to do that? The same thing is true with kids as is true with teachers. And that is that we need to create an environment where teachers can risk, but also where they feel very supported. So what Charmaine just said made me think about that. A lot of the times I'll do big trainings for the district, and usually I'll do school reform work with the whole district, meaning I move kids out of self-contained classrooms and back into general ed with this. I say but really that's the school staff that does it, but I support them to do that in real ways. And I usually work with the district for 3 to 5 years. But what I find to be true is with those students with maybe intellectual disabilities or students with very challenging behavior, they're going to need more and different support than the average teacher just doing inclusion, right? And so what I do with those teachers is I provide a lot of coaching where I'm side by side with them. And then what is really fun is when we plan lessons together and then reflect on those lessons afterwards, and then we do it again and again. And so teachers get that kind of support that they need to really be able to differentiate so all kids can be successful.
Cool. So Leanne says that let me bring up her comment here, that she loves the idea of consult time for teachers in lieu of that one-to-one with my child and will definitely work for this. And I do. That is like, I think that's one of the gold nuggets that Julie is sharing with us this morning, that we can look at how we use people and their knowledge in other ways. So especially if there's a paraeducator that is in the classroom, we don't want them Velcroed to your child. And there are ways that people can provide that support and have time to make accommodations or modifications if we use their skills in other ways, versus they have to be sitting across the table from your child.
I love, love, love that you said that, Leanne. And also, a lot of people think service to my kid means a special ed teacher is next to them, right? Like in some fashion. Now, I have a PhD in special education, and when I'm sitting next to somebody, it doesn't make them learn anything magically, right? Like my presence does nothing for this human. Here's where the magic lies. If I have planned this lesson so they can get access to the content, and the more invisible my support is, the better. So literally, me sitting next to this kid is not very effective or efficient. It actually is fairly stigmatizing to the child. So instead, can this adult be working with a group? Can they be working with a team? Can we have half the class and half the class? And I know many parents have said to me, a parent recently, I did a presentation about invisible supports. And so all the ways that you can create supports that are invisible to your child so that they can fit in naturally, socially, in all kinds of ways. And she said to me, I fought for the wrong things. She said, all my life, I fought for the wrong things. And I was like, oh, wow. That was like, it fell heavy on my heart, right? And she said, man, if I only thought about it, I would have been fighting for more independence, and I would have been fighting for what I call interdependence, meaning kids relying on one another or peer supports. But instead, I fought at every IEP meeting to get more and more and more and more support. And I realized now that wasn't the right thing. And that was a hard thing. This person has a high school student, right? And she was kind of grappling with that. So the more I can tell families, that are listening right now, that sometimes instead of independence, you're actually looking for interdependence, and that's with a peer. Sometimes you're looking for what is called invisible or silent supports, so that your child is seeking the support instead of just the person floating over and supporting them, right? Because we know in life when you get stuck, there's nobody hired that shows up, right, to support you. So if you want a great read on this that's free for you, if you Google the golden rule of inclusive education, something like that, and my name, or just the golden rule, it will pop up. And this article is my favorite article about how to provide support to kids that is seamless and silent and invisible, and that we're really rethinking that side-by-side support that many of us have fought really hard for.
Yeah, and what I can do is I can come back and in the comments, I can put a link in there for people for that, because that is one of my favorite articles too. And I thought, oh, I should print that off, and I didn't. But yeah, that is really helpful for parents to be able to read themselves and then share with the school staff.
So back to the question about how do I share this stuff, I think sometimes an article is less intimidating than, here, read this book. Although many parents have said these are good gifts to give, which I think is really fun, because you say, like, here's a gift for you, and I'd love for you to read it because it's full of ideas about how to do this. But I love to give just a free article too, so that the teacher has something, or the administrator has something to start with.
Right. Yeah. And I think, what I try to look at too is if the parent can figure out what kind of communication style the person has in learning style. So if they are, more of an auditory learner, then you can suggest Julie's podcast, because they can go through and pick one that they think is pertinent, and it's a quick 15 minutes and they'll get enormous amount of benefit. If it's a person that wants more research-based articles, I can also post links, because Julie has a ton of research-based articles. So if it's that person that really wants to delve into it. So I think we need to kind of adjust what we share with staff based on what we think is going to be, most received in the good light from them.
So Charmaine, it's making me laugh inside because I'm thinking about the learning style of the administrators or teachers. And I wanted to add that if they're a very musical learner, you could show them our rap video. Paula's in my rap video. It's a ridiculous rap video about our book, but maybe that'll be the thing that really sparks it.
I know. And I saw Paula at a conference in March, and I said, I want both of you to come on and talk about your co-teaching book and see if you can pull out your Apple sweaters. And I think that would be a great show too, because the co-teaching, I think, is such a key to making inclusion happen, because I don't know how schools can be successful if they maintain staff in a resource room and or a self-contained room, plus want to have time to collaborate with general ed teachers. I don't know what your experience has been, Julie, with staffs, but I really think we have to move away from that. I don't know how we can support both of those models.
I love that point. It's a pretty complex point that you bring up, and it's actually at the crux of many of the problems with inclusion. So what you're saying is, when we keep a bunch of staff in self-contained classrooms and resource classrooms, then all that staff is there. So there's nobody free to support in inclusive classrooms. And so many districts say to me, here's the plan. We're going to keep all the kids in the self-contained classrooms, and we're going to start to try inclusion. And I say that is not going to work because you can't run two models unless you have a grant from somewhere that you can figure out how to double your the number of your special ed staff. So instead, it's about rearranging the staff that you have and moving away from resource room supports and segregated supports. So instead of having all those staff, in fact, I can't. So I do probably my most powerful work is special education reviews for districts, where I go in with my colleague Kate McLeod and we draw their service. What do their services look like? We draw it for them and we show it back to them. So I meet with all the administrators and maybe their board of education often, and I demonstrate back to them, hey, this is how you're using your staff. And 9 times out of 10, tons of staff are in these segregated places. And so they maybe in one classroom, I'll walk in and there'll be one teacher and 4 assistants, or one teacher and 7 paraprofessionals in that same classroom with maybe 12 students. Well, if you think about the human resources in that room alone, does that make any sense? So instead, it's about bringing kids back to general education, but also bringing the services and supports with them by closing down those segregated settings. That's really the crux of the work that I do. But that concept of a review, if you're someone who really wants to get your school to become more inclusive and you don't really know how, some parents have been successful by saying, hey, what if we do a special ed review and we look at how inclusive we are? One more trick is if you're really thinking, boy, I want to push for more inclusion, but I don't know if anyone's even going to be excited about that or interested in that, or if that's on anybody's radar. I often take the work of just the social justice and diversity work that's going on already in the school district, and I expand that to include folks with disabilities. Because when we often in districts have big diversity pushes where people are really thinking about diversity in all kinds of ways, but they're leaving out disability as one of the most, I guess I would say, the last to have access are kids with disabilities. And so I just help connect those dots for people and say, hey, let's take an equity audit. Let's take a look carefully at the equity here. And that's the work that Kate McLeod and I do. And I find it to be stunning how seriously districts take our report and then how willing they are to engage in real professional development instead of what Charmaine said, that I come in and do one thing, which is fun and entertaining, except I care about real change for kids. And that happens over time and with work that happens over time with districts.
Oh, exactly. And we have several people that have typed in hashtag inclusion. So remember to do that if you want to be entered into winning one of Julie's books. And speaking of your books, Kathy has a question. She says, can the strategies and training from the book be used in a non-public school?
Hi, Kathy. Thanks for the question. Absolutely. So the difference when you say non-public, you mean private, I'm assuming. The main difference is the laws. So meaning I well understand the laws in public schools. And when it comes to private schools, if your child is in a private school, they don't have as much, what's the word, Charmaine? They don't have...
Well, yeah, the rights, and I don't really like the word entitlement, but there is a difference, and there's really three different scenarios of private schools. But I think if you look at the teaching strategies that you're talking about, I mean, certainly those can be implemented in, religious schools, private schools, because they're based on good teaching strategies, right? So it's not based on if your school is public or private, but it's based on what are going to be good strategies for all of your students in that building.
Right. And so the concept of the law is the only thing that's really different. So besides that, I do training in Catholic schools all the time, in Jewish schools all the time, in private and in public. And I actually am really, I find that private schools sometimes lack the training around how to differentiate in pretty significant ways. And so that's been a real push of mine lately to make sure that in those private schools, kids are getting that differentiated experience, so that people learn how to create inclusive classrooms in all kinds of schools. So the very short answer is yes, you can use them in any school.
Yes, that's helpful. And so I had a couple other questions that I know people have asked me in the past. So I wanted to get your take on it. And so one of the things that I find often happens in IEP meetings when we start talking about the placement and least restrictive environment is we hear this kind of mantra from special ed staff that the special ed resource room is less distracting. It's a small group. Your child is going to get this specialized instruction from a special teacher. And sometimes I bring a copy of one of your research articles showing that actually it's kind of a myth that special ed segregated classrooms actually benefit kids any more than having them supported in the regular classroom. So what would be some ways that parents could talk about that issue if the staff, they firmly believe that this resource room is going to be a better placement for your child than spending the day in the general ed classroom?
Yeah. And I love what you said, Charmaine, that staff honestly feels this way, right? So it's a pretty tough conversation to have when you're a parent and you know that you want your child included, and this group of staff really feel that a resource room or a segregated classroom is better for your child. So the article, I was trying to think of the name of the article. Maybe Charmaine, you can Google it while I'm talking because I can't think of the name of it. Because I think that would be a really handy resource. So I wrote an article, I think with George Theoharis, he might be my co-author on this one. And it's about the myths that we're told about the segregated classroom. So when I say that we're told, I mean educators have really sold families a bill of goods to say that, for example, segregated classrooms are non-distracting environments. I'm going to start with that one. Has anyone walked into a self-contained classroom? They are some of the most distractible environments in a school. In fact, you'll have kids that are making all kinds of noise. You'll have people in and out. You'll have all sorts of stuff happening. And I find some of the least distracting environments are rooms like a fourth grade classroom where all the kids are really pretty on target. And a student then has access to see a classroom model. So meaning all these folks that are on task and on target, that's the best way for a kid to learn how to be on task and on target, is to surround yourself with peer models. So the non-distractible environment is actually not true. And so sometimes I just ask families to say, boy, we really want our child to learn from models, behavioral models or academic models or both, or communication models. So surrounding ourselves with that is really useful. The other thing that we say is, smaller class size is really important. For sure. Smaller class size is important, but it's important for all learners. And when we say that kids with disabilities need to be in small class sizes, but nobody else does, what we're really reifying is this concept that separate is better and that segregated is better. And instead, I think in any classroom, you use small group instruction all day long. So if you've got 2 educators in there, you're running stations, maybe you're running 3 or 4 stations. Now all kids are in small group instruction, and they're not grouped by disability. I often use Brown versus Board of Education in this argument. So I basically explained that in 1954, we decided it was not okay to segregate human beings by race, and it is not okay to segregate human beings by disability. And so I make that parallel, which for some people is shocking, like very stunning. And, Lou Brown was my mentor, and he always talked about Brown versus Board of Education, not the same Brown, but if you know who Lou Brown is, he's an inclusion guru. And he always brought up that Brown versus Board of Ed. And at first I thought, man, it's too in people's face to take race and really juxtapose it next to disability and to really show people how it's the same thing. And then I have over time realized it is one of the most powerful tools we have, is to say it's the same thing. And in the same way we wouldn't argue for a segregated racial setting, we will not accept a segregated disability setting. So that is something else that I talk about.
Well, thank you. And we just, recently had the anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. And if you're ever in Topeka, Kansas, the National Park Service has a wonderful museum there that has interactive exhibits and everything. So that's pretty fun. Tasha's here with us from Texas, and she says, as a parent, how do I go about getting this done, the special ed review in her school district in Texas? So do you want to share with us how people can get in contact with you, or suggest contact for administrators?
Yep. So Tarsha, thanks for the question. I'd love if you did this. So my website is julie@inclusiveschooling.com. Well, that's my email address. My website is Inclusive Schooling. Either way, so you could just send me an email, julie@inclusiveschooling.com, where you connect me to your administrators and say, I'd really love an equity audit done. So Kate Richmond and I do these McLeod, she's been married for a while, but I first knew her as Richmond. Kate McLeod and I do these equity audits, and we look at how placements being done by race, by disability, we look at socioeconomic status, we look at LGBT students who identify in those ways. We look at this very wide, broad group of marginalized populations, English language learners too, and we see where are they being educated, how are they being educated, and how might we need to make this school more equitable. So very quickly, you said, how do you get in contact with us? Connect your administration to us, and we can share with them information. You can send them to our website too and just say, this is the work that these people do. Sometimes people print out my CV and send it to them. But Kate and I have this really nice document that shares all the things that we do for schools, and then administrators can work with us about how that looks. But we find this to be really powerful to do an equity audit in your district because they get a lot of information that they haven't maybe looked at. And we help them see it, and then we help them rectify a lot of the issues. And it's probably no surprise, but in many districts, students who get free and reduced lunch, for example, are more likely to be segregated than others. Or African-American students are more likely to be segregated than others. And so when we draw these pictures, meaning we create these charts to say, so this is what your school district looks like, it's really difficult to argue with those visuals when you see that, you know, we have placement patterns that are not equitable. And so we help them, we first show it to them, and then we help them get out of that mess by making their district more equitable in all kinds of ways.
So, yeah, I would encourage parents this summer, you know, mostly, you know, usually your administrators are working throughout the summer. So this would be a good time to contact them, give them Julie's information, and see if you can't set up a time for this coming school year where, you know, Julie and Kate could come in and do that. I love how you call it that equity audit. And Marjorie is here with us, and she has a question. She says, I know it works, but getting the middle school and high school to buy in is nearly impossible.
Thanks, Marjorie. Middle school and high school, I've got a couple thoughts for you. I think in 2 weeks, Kate and I are launching our 21-day series for middle and high school teachers, and it's all about strategies for middle and high school teachers. So I have personally taught special education in elementary, middle, and high school. And I'm going to be honest, I think high school is the easiest place to include kids. And it's because there's a really flexible schedule, and you can select classes that make the most sense for students' gifts, strengths, and talents. Middle school is probably the most challenging, in my opinion, and everyone has different opinions, but I think elementary and high are the easiest place to include, and middle school can be a little bit trickier. But you do have the benefit of that now, like 8-period day usually, so you can select classes that make more sense. And I've now worked in 3 districts where inclusion at the middle and high school is much, much better than inclusion at the elementary school. And I've been thinking a ton about this question because honestly, I thought the same thing you thought, which is like, I think it's harder as you go up, but then I've had this opposite experience around high school. And I just thought most mindsets of teachers are more inclusive at the elementary and less inclusive as you go up. Well, in these 3 school districts that I've been working in, I'm finding that that's not true at all. And I'm thinking that it's so much about educators' mindset, and it's so much about the administrator's mindset. So what I've found is middle school and high school getting into the right mindset around that. I'll use North Penn as a school district that is incredible at the upper middle high school. And if you want to contact Jenna Rufo to learn how to connect your team to them, she would be willing. She's the current director of special education. It's amazing what's happening in North Penn School District, which is a huge school district, and particularly amazing at the middle and high schools right now. And so kind of for me, it's like realizing, whoa, in some districts, this is better at the middle and high school. Not to say their elementaries aren't amazing, because they actually are. So this is not an example that way. But if I were to tell you where in the country to see that secondary inclusion, that's where I'd send you. So again, it's to the mindset of educators. A lot of secondary educators think, hey, I teach content, not kids. And it's really getting educators to realize, nope, I teach students the content in differentiated ways. So very possible to do this work.
And say the name of the director again in North Penn.
Yeah, Jenna Rufo, Jennarufo. She's a friend of mine, and I've worked a little bit in North Penn schools, and I'm really impressed when I see what's going on in the secondary schools there.
And is that Pennsylvania or?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is that in Pittsburgh or?
Well, I don't know, because my GPS tells me how to get there, and then I just.
Okay, I was just wondering.
Sometimes I sound really cagey about like where something is, and it's just because if I were to rank order my skill sets, finding anything is it's like number 1 deficit area. So I know that it's in the state of Pennsylvania.
Okay, we've got that narrowed down.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost at the top of the hour here, and I just want to thank you so much, Julie. I'm going to look through our comments again and make sure we've covered. Yeah, so Marlo was also asking, she is in Pennsylvania for looking for her school district. So Marlo, I think it would be the same thing if you can, you can email Julie at inclusiveschooling.com.
Yeah, so it's just Julie at inclusiveschooling.com. Or if you forget that, just go to Inclusive Schooling. You'll see our website, and then it says Contact Us. So Kate and I answer all the responses. Sometimes it takes a couple days. We've got a lot of questions coming in, but we'll respond to you. And I think the smartest thing to do is say to administrators, hey, I want this person to come. I want her to do an equity audit. I want her to train. I want her to whatever it is you want. And then providing them the connection to me, and then essentially we'll connect and see what's possible, what we can accomplish. That's kind of how I think about it.
Great. Leanne asks if the 21-day series for teachers is linked on your website.
Hi, Leanne. Yep, that's in the, I don't have my website up, but maybe I should pull it up. No, let me just think for a second. It's like the online courses. The 21-day series is an online course, and now there's just one 21-day series, and it's awesome. And it's kind of about more than inclusive education. It's about happiness and joy and motivation and connecting learners to each other in really profound ways. We have gotten so much great feedback from this. Now Kate has revamped it completely there's a second set we're getting done, which is just for secondary educators. So middle and high school, and with all the examples being middle and high school only. So if that's what you're waiting on, make sure that the 21-day series is for secondary. It'll say secondary or something to that effect. It'll probably be out in 1 week, I would say.
Okay, great. And Kathy asks if there'll be a transcript of this available. This has been great. And Kathy, what I've been doing is I have a closed membership group on Facebook. So I've been putting the transcripts for our live training in that. If you're interested in joining our membership community, you can just go to the top of the Facebook page we're on now and click on that image, and it will give you the link to go there. But yeah, and I can come back also and just type in some comments so you can kind of see like at which part of the conversation were we talking about which topic, and that can be helpful too. But yeah, the transcript I do for the members in our closed group. And let me see if we have any other questions. I also wanted to give you the name of Julie's podcast, and you can listen to this on iTunes. And Julie, for people who maybe joined us later, if you can tell us what your new upcoming episode is going to be about on your podcast.
Sure. So episode 4 is going to be out next week, and it's going to be what do I need to do this summer to get ready for next school year? And so I'm putting together an incredible resource list for anyone, for parents, for educators, for administrators, and I'll do it all in 15 minutes. But it was a teacher who asked me the question, how do I refuel and get ready for next school year? So I'm responding to that question on the next podcast. And it's not just for how educators can recover and refuel, it's also for how families can. And then it will give you lots of tips about if you're a parent, it'll give you lots of tips about what you can share with your educators, or you can just send them to the podcast and they can check it out themselves. Also, Charmaine, I didn't mention it, but we've got all sorts of hilarious and cool merch on the website. And so if you're a parent, you need to have coffee in this when you're at your IEP, don't you think? And then the pencils say inclusion is just education, and then inclusive schooling pens. And so if you're attending an IEP meeting, I really thought about the merchandise in this way, which is how do I arm folks to sort of say, hey, this is who I am, this is what I believe. And I feel like I want to tell you a couple more things. One is that the Summer Leadership Institute is coming up. If you want to change your administrators' thoughts about inclusion, they need to know about the Summer Leadership Institute. So Charmaine, I'll send you a link, or maybe you can Google it. Essentially, Oh, it's actually on my website, live events. It's going to be called the Summer Leadership Institute. You can go right there and get information about it. We've got people coming from all over the country, and I find it to be incredibly powerful. So send folks there. And the reason I thought about that is because we are going to be having a whole range of t-shirts, like You Can Sit With Us t-shirts and belonging t-shirts and all kinds of shirts that after the Institute, they will be up on our website for people to buy. So that's something else. It's about your wardrobe. What will you wear for your IEP meeting? And that might be what you need.
Well, and that sounds a lot more positive than I had put this kind of tag on my website, and it was a name tag, and it said, "Hello, my name is that parent."
You know what? If you have a Everyone Belongs Here t-shirt with that name tag, I think the combo is going to give the exact right message. So, don't mess with me. Plus, I'm real inclusive. And we got to get somewhere in the middle there. So I like it. I think it's correct.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Julie, for spending your first day of summer with us. Great. And if you know friends that weren't able to be here with us live, make sure they know the replay will stay up on my Visions and Voices Together Facebook page. And I can also give you, Julie, the URL for the video. So if you want to share it elsewhere, you can do that too. But I just love the format that we did, and we didn't do it in 15 minutes.
But next time we could, Charmaine. We could do these little 15 minutes, one question at a time, and then you can put them together. I think we should try one.
Well, and the other thing I could try to do is edit it. So we could edit this hour-long video to 15-minute segments according to the questions, and we could have that available too. So lots of possibilities, right?
Who knows? I don't feel like you have to do that, but I'll tell you, 15-minute increments so you can get so much done.
I'm going to try that in my personal life.
Absolutely. I was going to show your viewers one of my to-do lists, but I thought maybe that would be too much for people. Let's do this. Yeah, just do one podcast, and then we can talk more about my scheduling problems later.
Well, do you have any closing thoughts that you want to leave us with, Julie?
I do. I want to say to everyone listening, summer is here. One of the big secrets I'm going to give away on the podcast in terms of how to prepare for next school year is rest and refuel and reconnect. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds counterintuitive because it sounds like I should be like, buy this book and read it. Instead, I want to say that probably the best thing you can do is enjoy your children, love them, connect with them, spend time doing nothing, all those kinds of things. And if you're a teacher, refuel. What does that mean to you? And then, of course, I'll give a resource list to you. But don't forget that this is the long game for all of us, right? We've got to think about how to create more inclusive schools. And it is exhausting, and it is maddening, and it is frustrating, and it is hard. And so we all have to remember that self-care and refueling is really the key to keeping this work going. So I know that's maybe not what you expected, but it's really what I want to share with people for this summer.
Thank you so much. I think that is important because those are the 3 R's that are going to make the big difference when we start the new school year, I think. Just a last minute reminder, if you want to be entered to win one of Julie's books that we have, just type in #inclusion. And hopefully my IEP bot is sending out the link so you can be entered into that contest. But I want to thank everybody for being here today. It's, the magic of technology that we can be in all these different states and we can still be sharing and communicating with others. So I'm Charmaine Tanner. I do a weekly Facebook Live show. I'll be on again next Thursday at noon Mountain Time. I would encourage you, if you haven't, like my Visions and Voices Together Facebook page so you get notifications when we go live. And I want to again thank Julie and wish everybody a summer where they can reconnect, rejuvenate, and what was the other R? Refuel. Yep. So thank you, everybody, and we shall see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.